Good afternoon, students. This is Anshu Sharma. Welcome you all once again to the lecture recording of Thomas Gray's Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard. So, yesterday I had finished, it's there on the screens. Let's see, yesterday I had finished up till this point where the poet is telling us how the simple villagers who are lying in this graveyard were capable of great things, but the only issue was that they did not get the right opportunities to reach those great heights. They were not lacking in intelligence or bravery or capability, but they were lacking in opportunity. Now, continuing with the same theme, once again, you can see on your screens the next passages we have before you. I'll just quickly read the poem. The word meanings are there on the screen, they are very clear. You can read them. But first, let me just quickly go through the poem. Their lot forbade, nor circumscribed alone, their growing virtues, but their crimes confined, forbade to wade through slaughter to a throne, and shut the gates of mercy on mankind. The struggling pangs of conscious truth to hide, to quench the blushes of ingenuous shame, or heap the shrine of luxury and pride with incense kindled at the muse's flame. Far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife, their sober wishes never learned to stray. Along the cool, sequestered vale of life, they kept the noiseless tenor of their way. Yet, even as these bones from insult to protect, some frail memorial still erected nigh, with uncouth rhymes and shapeless sculpture decked, implores the passing tribute of a sigh. So, um, now the poet is continuing with the same idea that that these people were in no way less to the city bred people or to the richer people, and he is continuing with the same theme. And here you can see that he says their lot forbade. Lot means luck. Okay, please be careful about the word meanings. Do not get confused, because lot also means, like we say, lots of fruits or lots of money, to convey many. But here, lot does not mean many, lot means circumstances, lot means luck. Okay, so their lot, their luck, that is, they were not lucky in certain things, but at the same time the poet says that their luck forbade them, stopped them. And what did it stop them from? It circumscribed them. Circumscribed again means limited them. Their luck stopped them, their luck limited them. What all did it limit? It limited their growing virtues. Growing virtues, that is the good things that they could have done. Right? Like in the last passage, I told you how he says that maybe they could have become great poets, or they could have become great brave soldiers, or they could have become kings. So, this virtue of becoming great, that was also stopped. Okay, they were not lucky. But at the same time, not only did it stop the virtues, but the luck also stopped their crimes. Because just like in the last paragraph, or last to last paragraph, where the poet talks about how the rulers, they become powerful, they become kings, they capture thrones, but at the same time, while doing so, a lot of people are killed, there are wars, there are battles, lot of lives is lost, lot of loss of property is there. So all these negativity, all these negative things also were circumscribed, also were limited, because these people did not proclaim, or did not got down to becoming powerful, or becoming kings or rulers, and so on. So he says that their lot forbade to wade through slaughter to a throne, because becoming a king is not an easy task. It needs a lot of a lot of battles and wars to be fought, and lot of people are killed. So slaughter, you killing people. So many people die in the war and battles, so how is it justified? This is what the poet is saying. And at the same time, you also shut the gates of mercy on mankind. Shut the gates of mercy on mankind, because whatever kindness, you have to put it aside. Once you decide your target is that you have to become a ruler, or you have to become a king, or you have to capture a lot of land, then lot of unfairness goes into these activities. Lot of killings, and lot of people are, executed, they are slaughtered, they are killed. And your kindness, that concept of kindness is shut. Okay, that comes to an end. So the kind eye, the kind view that you should take towards mankind, that is stopped, that is circumscribed when you decide to become a powerful ruler. So the poet is trying to say that if their luck did not allow them to become powerful rulers, then at the same time, the luck also stopped them from becoming cruel, right? And therefore, they were prevented from becoming responsible for death of so many people. So if on one hand it is good, on the other hand it is bad. Both ways. That is what the poet is trying to tell us. Then he says that struggling pangs of conscious truth to hide, to quench the blushes of ingenuous shame. Ingenuous means frank. Struggling, fighting, pangs means pain, and conscious means known truth. So, here in these two lines, the poet says that when you have done something wrong, then it automatically you try to, heart of heart, our inner conscious knows everything. On top, on surface, maybe you act as if nothing is wrong, but within yourself, if something wrong has been done by you, then you know it. There's no hiding. So here the same thing the poet says, that they did not have to fight any consciousness, or they did not have to hide any pain, or they did not have to slake or quieten down the blushes of ingenuous shame. That is, the act that they would have done, the shameless act that they would have done of indulging in war and battle and killing people to become powerful rulers. And then they would be guilty of this act, and they would not be able to hide it from their own selves. And somewhere or the other, you do feel guilty that you have attained power, but at the same time, at what cost? Okay, so this is what the poet is saying, that these people never had to face a heavy conscience, or face the fact that they have been responsible for destruction or killing of people. So they were saved from this. Then, or heap the shrine of luxury and pride with incense kindled at the muse's flame. So, again, the same idea is here, that they did not have to, they were not accustomed to any kind of luxury, and neither were they proud, and therefore they never had to kind of bow down before these things, because they were not kind of they did not have a weakness for these things. So neither luxury nor pride, nor any kind of aspirations, or nor any kind of ambition was there for which they would have to bow down, or they would have to compromise upon their self respect. So they did not have, again, this is the concept of kind of हिंदी में जिसको कहते हैं चाटुकारिता, वो इनको करने की ज़रूरत नहीं पड़ी. They did not need to bow down before anybody in order to get their work done. right? Then, far from the madding crowd's ignoble strife, their sober wishes never learn to stray. This is very important because Far from the Madding Crowd is interestingly the title of Thomas Hardy's novel. Maybe Thomas Hardy was inspired by these lines and he gave the title to one of his very major books, novels, Far from the Madding Crowd. It's a very popular book. Maybe if you go on to do your PG, you might have this as part of your syllabus. Thomas Hardy was another writer. Please do not get confused with Thomas Gray. Thomas Gray is the poet who's written Elegy, which we are reading now, and Thomas Hardy was another writer who had written very many major novels. So, Far from the madding crowd, madding is reference to the busy crowd. Now you have seen, at least my students of Chaksu, you go to Jaipur very often, you live in Chaksu, and I think you can draw a comparison between the life at Chaksu and the life in Jaipur, or maybe Delhi, or maybe Bombay. If you see the kind of life that people lead here in the cities, it's like hustling, bustling, lot of traffic, busyness, people are running from one place to other, they don't have time. And on the other hand, no doubt the villagers are also very busy people, but at the same time their pace is more leisurely and they have more space. There is, that low, shameful, quarreling act that people do in the cities to, grab whatever they can lay their hands on. That thing is not there in the villages. Why? Because the requirements, the needs, the wishes of the village people are simpler. They are sober. So they are simple wishes and they never learn to stray, means to go off track. They lead a simple life, they have simple requirements. They just need food on their plate and they need clothes on their bodies. And beyond that, a simple life, a simple living, they do not require anything else. Whereas in the cities, the people are always running after materialistic goods, always trying to, if they have a 4 room home, they want a 6 room flat. If they have a 6 room flat, they want a 10 room villa. And if they have one car, they'll want 4 cars for every family member, and so on and so forth. So the ambitions, the desires, the materialistic aspirations are unlimited, and for that people are running helter skelter. But in case of the village, people are, more simple lives they lead. So their sober wishes, their simple wishes never go off track. They lead a simple, happy life. Along the cool, sequestered veil of life, this is like they lead a secluded life. They lead a simple, secluded life. Like, for example, in the villages, you have more greenery, you have vast fields, you have water bodies, you have lots of trees. So that is the reference that the poet is drawing here, that like, for example, a farmer rests under a shady tree. Similarly, the life is also shaded, it is secluded, it is quiet, and they keep the noiseless tenor of their way. Tenor means course. So they simply silently walk on their clean path. They are going on the green fields, and the imagery is again being drawn from the farmland. It is being drawn from the jungles. It is being drawn from the green pastures. So from the mountains, from the plains. That is the imagery that he's drawing here. That just as the movement is noiseless, it is silent, there is less of traffic in the villages, there's more peace all around. So similarly, the poet says that these people, in comparison to the noise, to the fast life of the cities, in comparison to that, their lives were simpler, they were quieter, they were peaceful, they were happier, they were sober, right? This is what he's trying to say. So they led a very peaceful life, quiet life, simple life. Yet even these bones from insult to protect some frail memorial still erected nigh. But now in this paragraph, in this fourth paragraph on the page, you can see yet. Now the poet is using the word yet to tell us about the villagers, that maybe their lives are simple. They were not running about, they were not mad about power, money. But at the same time, even these people, when they died, they wanted to be remembered. So now he's coming back to the graveyard, he's coming back to the graves, and he says that these bones from insult to protect. Then, obviously, in the Christian religion, the people when they die, they are put in the graves. And he says that why do we put people, why do we not let the dead bodies, lie just like that? Why do we not allow that? First, from the hygiene point of view, and secondly, because it is not considered to be respectful. When a person dies, then in death, we give a certain respect to the dead by burying them with proper ceremony in a proper place, in a secluded spot, in an individual place where nobody disturbs them. So here he says, he's referring to the dead people, and he says, yet even these bones from insult to protect some frail memorial, some small, weak, little memorial, still erected nigh. Nigh means near. Nigh is Old English, and it means near, close by. So he says that even if they do not, like the rich people who have grand tombstones, even if that is not possible, these people at least desire that there should be a small memorial erected in their memory. And maybe the tombstone is nothing very grand, but at least a small, little tombstone should be placed. Maybe a small, little sculpture is made. That is at least which they desire, that they should be buried in a certain way, maybe not a grand way, but a certain simple way, a simple manner, with uncouth rhymes and shapeless sculpture decked. So uncouth rhymes, now again, because these people were unlettered, these people were not taught, because knowledge had never opened up their ample pages, had opened up her ample pages to her, so they did not, their language was not refined. So that is why the poet says uncouth. Uncouth means unrefined, non-refined, crude, unsophisticated. So he says, whatever little the maybe the local village poet, or those singers who rhyme a few words, so maybe whatever they little that they could do, that is what they inscribed on the tombstone. And a little shapeless sculpture was decked. That is not a lifelike bust. Like the grand people, when they die, you have those lifelike big busts constructed, big statues constructed in their memory. So he says nothing of that sort, but maybe a simple sculpture is mounted, a simple sculpture that is decorated with some simple, it is covered with some inscription, or some little engraving is done, or some carving out is done, and the simple grave is decorated simply, implores the passing tribute of a sigh. And these uncouth rhymes, this shapeless sculpture also requests for some little sympathy of somebody who's passing by. Now, this is the reference to the poet himself, because Gray is also just by chance he's passing next to the grave. I had told you that it was his mother's village, when he had gone to his mother's village and he had by chance passed the graveyard, that he had been inspired to write this poem. So he is now drawing a comparison. He says, just like, Gray, for example, has gone by the grave side, has gone by the graveyard, and he's looked at these people lying there, and he's talked about them, he's actually written a poem about them. Similarly, he says that most probably even these dead people, even these graves that are uncouth, which are not anything grand, which have just small sculptures on them, even they desire that if somebody is passing by, they should stop for a moment. They should pay their respects to the dead people who are lying there, and not just go away without looking at even once, or not even giving them a single glance. So he says that these uncouth rhymes, which are engraved on the tombstone, or these shapeless sculptures that have been mounted on these simple graves, they kind of attract the attention, and they desire that any person who's passing by should at least pay a little bit of respect, at least sigh. Sigh is letting out a long drawn breath. When you take a loud breath, you suck in air in your deep, breathing in, that is known as a sigh, and letting it out. So lambi saans jisko kehte hain, that is a sigh. So he says that these graves are kind of imploring or requesting or desiring that any person who passes by should stop for a moment, should read what is written on the graves, should pay their respect, should pray for their souls, and then move on. Okay, so this is a very gentle poem, you can say, and a very simple poem. And the poet is just, kind of imagining that the simple villagers, after their death, have very simple wishes. And at least we can do that. That much, at least, we as readers also can do by paying our respects to these people who are lying in these graves unknown. Okay, so I'll end here. I hope you've been revising your previous passages. Once again, go through this one, what I have taught today, and tomorrow we'll do the next batch of passages. So, wishing you all the best and thank you once again. Bye bye.